this video I will teach you a super easy way of painting a landscape in watercolors. This watercolor tutorial is perfect for beginners. We will go through the process step by step and I will teach you how to make a beautiful watercolor painting at home. I share weekly art videos on my channel where I share in real time step-by-step tutorials to teach you how to paint and how to draw. The materials I'm going to use today are watercolor paper. 300 GSM watercolor paper is what I use, but you can use any type of watercolor paper. I'm going to use a paintbrush. My entire painting is going to be done with one brush. I'm going to use a sketch pencil for a quick sketch, and I'm going to use watercolor paint. Feel free to join with gouache if you prefer, but I'm going to use watercolor paint today. I'm keeping my sketch as simple as I can. Just a line for the horizon and a few simple shapes for the islands in the distance. We are painting a river water landscape today, and there's water in the foreground, some grasses before that, and in the distance are some islands. It is also a really early morning sunrise painting, so I'm going to make sure that my colors are fresh and light to really reflect that atmosphere. I will show you my inspiration photo all the way at the end of this video, so if you're curious, make sure you stay put. I am starting with my lightest color, with this bright yellow. It is going to be the color of the sunrise, and I'm just applying it to dry paper with loose strokes. I'm keeping really horizontal, quick strokes, and I can loosen it up by adding water later on. Let's zoom in a little bit so you can see what I'm doing. If I go over the edges with my wet brush, it loosens up the edges and the paint naturally blurs towards the areas where the water is. This is one of my favorite parts of painting in watercolors. Adding water and see what happens. I always keep some kitchen roll or a bit of cloth at hand to wipe my brush on, so I recommend you do the same. So I'm adding bright blue to the sky. I don't have to add my paint very evenly. I'm very happy for some of the white of the paper to shine through, because there's going to be clouds and different colors in the sky. So with quick loose moves, I'm adding this really light bright blue to the sky. If it mixes up with the yellow, that's absolutely fine. There's so many different colors in the sky, so if there's going to be a little bit of green, that is not a problem. You can always add some more water to make your painting a little bit more loose. As a general rule, the more water you use, the looser your painting is going to be, and the less water you use, the more control you have over what happens with your paint. I'm also adding some of this blue to the water, where the water is going to be. Because I work on dry paper, I keep quite a lot of control over where the paint is going to go. I'm using this really large brush. I don't know what brand it is because I've had it for a really long time. And it used to be my grandmother's. It's one of the things I've inherited from her, but it's my favorite brush, and every time I use it, it reminds me of her. So it's really lovely to use it today. It's quite large. I would say it's a size 12 or size 14. I can't read the writing on it. Just adding a little bit more water to my painting, and then I'm ready for the next layer. With a bit of tissue paper, I take out the shapes of the clouds. This is easiest when your paint is still wet. You can always make it a bit wet again before you do so. It's a really great trick to add some shapes of clouds into your sky. The islands in the background, they're quite dark and quite well defined, and I want to keep them both loose as well as having some darker stripes or some clear lines in there. And I'm mixing up some green and blue to make a really dark teal color. So one of my favorite colors. And you can see it is significantly darker than my previous lines. And where my paper is still a bit wet, the color blurs out and creates these really soft and loose watercolor marks. I think people who are new to painting in watercolors are often scared to add quite a lot of pigments to their paper. So they work in really soft layers, which is fine. Like, you can make really light and soft watercolor paintings, but sometimes adding quite a lot of paint or quite a lot of color can really elevate your painting. So you can see the contrast between these background layers and what I am now creating over it is quite high. You can see on the right hand side my paper was really wet and the new paint is blurring out and mixing up with the older paint, whilst on the left hand side those areas were a bit more dry and my paint stays in place a little bit better. I'm also adding some of this darker teal to the foreground because there's lots of grasses here, lots of plants growing, and it puts the whole landscape into perspective. If you feel that your paint is a little bit rough on the paper, add a little bit of water. It needs to feel quite comfortable. So there we go. You can see I'm still using this really large brush. I'm not switching brushes today. And I'm keeping my painting quite loose, a little bit abstract with bold and quite quick strokes. The color that I'm using here is yellow ochre. Yellow ochre is one of my favorite colors to use in landscape paintings because it mixes really beautiful with blues and greens, and it instantly gives a bit of warmth to a landscape. So you can see I'm purposefully mixing it up a little bit here. Yellow ochre is a little bit of this sort of scent color, light brown, and it doesn't always come in basic paint sets, so I would recommend it to be one of the colors that you can buy extra, because it is one that I use a lot. It's one of my favorite colors. If you have a bit too much paint on the paper, as I have now, with a dry clean brush you can soak it up a little bit, and that instantly softens the edges a little bit as well. I want the colors on the foreground to be quite intense, so I'm going over it, adding a little bit more paint, just to make sure that we have that intensity at the foreground that gives depth to the artwork. In landscapes, usually the colors are more intense in the foreground and then fade away further away from us. So I'm just adding a little bit more blue to that island. I'm trying not to overwork this painting. And as I said, I will share the reference photo at the end, but I really use my references as a form of inspiration. I'm trying to not copy them exactly. I look at them, find inspiration, and then start painting without having to copy the colors exactly or to have everything look exactly the same as in the photo. And now it's time for these layers to dry. So I'm putting my brush down and I will be back shortly. There we go, my paper is dry. It's just like magic. In reality this took a few minutes, so I made a cup of tea, but here I cut out the drying process, of course. And I'm now going to add some purples to my sky and to the water to really create those light sunrise colors. The sky has so many beautiful colors in it, and sometimes it's fun to experiment with colors a little bit. So you can see I am adding some more water to this paint because the background is completely dry. I can paint over these greens and over these blues without mixing up the colors. And naturally, if I rub a lot, I will reactivate the layers underneath and they will mix up. But as long as I'm a bit gentle, I can now layer the colors without them mixing up with the layers underneath. It takes a bit of a gentle touch and also just a bit of a bit of practice. So I wanted to have some pink in the sky and also some pink in the reflections in the water. I'm using very light layers of watery paint here. You can see how my colors look a bit lighter now they have dried up. So I want to intensify them a bit and add some more of the teal color to the areas that I want to have the darkest colors. So here I'm adding some of that darker teal, blue, green to the grasses in the foreground. Really taking my time for it, there's absolutely no rush. So a little bit more green. I like these colors to mix up a little bit and create a real depth of color, where some areas are a little bit more blue and some other areas are a little bit more green. And I want this to feel like quite a detailed part of the painting when it's finished, without adding in too much detail. It's a bit of a trick. I want it to feel like there's lots of things going on and lots to look at, without drawing in or painting in all these details manually. So the watercolor paint does that for me a little bit. I want to create these loose brush strokes and create ways of them to dry up that give an interesting effect. I also want a bit more of the yellow ochre at the top. See, there we go, not too thick. I'm just having a play around with this. I feel like when you take your art too serious, you sometimes cramp up a little bit, not literally, but like artistically. If the stakes are too high, it becomes really hard to paint something that you're happy with. So sometimes it's just okay to experiment and to have a little bit of fun and just to get to something that makes you feel good in the moment instead of trying to overthink too much what it's going to look like at the end. This is what creative flow means for me, when I can forget about everything else and just really enjoy the process in the moment. Here, for example, I decided I want some yellow ochre at the background. Here we go. Just add a little bit of strokes and some color there as well. Has nothing to do with the reference photo, but all with what I fancy doing in the moment. I want to add a little bit more of those grasses in the foreground. So there we go, with a bit of water. Just blurring out those shapes. And I'm going to use a little bit of a watercolor painting trick. And I'm adding some salt to these shapes. And adding salt to your paintings is most efficient if the layer underneath is white. So if there's just paper underneath. But it will work here as well, and we'll look later on, see what magic has happened there because of the salt. So you can see, I sprinkle it lightly over those areas, and it will create some movement and some interest. And it's something that I love doing. It's normal table salt, no special magical painting tools, just normal kitchen salt, and you only need a little bit. I'm also adding a few much darker marks to the foreground. So I've mixed in a little bit of black with that teal color, very subtly, because black is a very overpowering color and I don't want to create like a really deep dark black. So a tiny bit with that teal is enough to lift the color and making it a little bit darker. So I've dropped that into the grasses, and I'm now really carefully with the tip of my brush adding a little duck in my painting. There we go, teeny tiny. Let's zoom in a little bit. I'll add another one. This brush is a little bit big for these fine details, but it is okay. And this is not a detailed painting. This is just a hint or a suggestion of that animal swimming there. So, a little bit of shadows underneath the duck. Just a drop of really watery paint. And there we go. Our landscape is almost finished. What I'm missing yet is some birds in the sky. Maybe a few suggestions of shapes here in the background as well. Nothing too detailed. This is a little bit abstract and that's absolutely fine. Maybe there are some trees or some people or I don't know, whatever you see in it. So, these are just the final touches. Whilst the foreground is drying, you can see in the corner some of these splashes are still really wet. I'm making sure that my brush has a sharp point. Sometimes you need to just use your fingers to make sure that the tip of the brush is really pointy. And with that black dark blue paint, I'm adding a few birds in the sky. And there we go. My painting for today is finished. I hope you joined in as well. And I really would love to see what you've made. So make sure you tag me as Makings and Musings if you share your creations on social media so I can see them. This is my final artwork. I will take the tape off shortly. I love this tape, it's so colorful. But I will take it off shortly and my painting is finished and I hope you enjoyed it. I am sharing more step-by-step painting tutorials on my website, so make sure you follow me and that you join in. This is the reference picture that I used. And I look forward to seeing you again in my next class. There we go. This is what it looked like when it was finished. Thank you for watching and I'll see you around.